Okay, so welcome to our transit webinar. This is something that MassRIDES is hosting. We're very excited to share some of this information with you today. The real goal is to talk about what transit offers us, in particular our workplaces and our employees. So we're going to be taking you through a few different ideas and perspectives that MassRIDES has, and how MassRIDES can really help with that program. So what are we talking about? We're talking about getting on the bus, or because we're talking about Massachusetts, we're talking about getting on the train or the boat. But really, how do we make transit part of your commute options plan that we're going to be talking about? Before we dive into things, I just want to extend a welcome from your MassRIDES team. Hopefully, you will see some familiar faces on there. These are our program directors and outreach coordinators. If you are not sure who your outreach coordinator is, or you're not familiar with these folks, you're joining us maybe for the first time, please reach out to the MassRIDES team at the end of this. There'll be some contact details, and we can connect you with the right person who can help you with all these programs. We're going to be talking a lot today about different things that workplaces can do to support transit in their workplace and support people riding transit. And MassRIDES is really set up to help with some of those efforts and some of those programs. So certainly, we're here to encourage that kind of ridership and get people interested, and we want to be able to help. Before we dive into the content, just a quick introduction to myself. My name's Adam Arnold. I work with Urban Trans. We do a good amount of work with MassRIDES, helping spread some of this information, supporting our workplaces, learning about new ideas, different types of mobility. I do a lot of work in the States, sort of talking about this kind of thing, and I wanted to share some of my ideas with you today. Not to throw you off, I did start the presentation with a picture of a London bus, and you are hearing this with a British voice. We are going to be talking about Massachusetts today, so don't be alarmed. We're not sort of taking you on a trip across to Europe. So let's kind of get into things. As I say, we'll have questions at the end. So if you've got any great ideas, you can scribble those down, and we'll address some of those at the end of the session. So what are our goals today? So the goals for this webinar are really to help learn about some of the transit options that are available to your employees. We know across the state there are different types of transit, different agencies, different availability, and it might not always be the best option for everybody, but we do want to talk a little bit about some of the options that are available those employees who have that access. We want to talk a little bit about the benefits that transit can offer, both to your employees but also to your workplace, how it can improve the productivity, the happiness of your staff, and the impact that that has on your workplace. And then talk a little bit about how you can create a transit-friendly workplace. So if we recognize that transit is important, how does a workplace actually try and make their workplace more transit-friendly and encourage people to take more transit? So very quickly, a little brief history of transit. This is how it all started, of course, these early experiments in transportation. We could probably spend hours or a whole morning talking about the history of transit. It's a long history, a long, fascinating history for transit nerds amongst us. But really, I think it's worth talking about the concept of transit, the concept of paying someone to give you a ride has a long history. You can go back to ancient Japan, people taking ferries. You trace it through, if you think of the history of the US, people taking stagecoach trips. The idea of groups of people paying for someone to transit them somewhere, whether it's to work, whether it's on longer journeys, that kind of thing. So clearly not a new concept. Within the Massachusetts context, we can look here in Newtonville. In 1891, we had the Newton and Boston Street Railway began operating in Newtonville. That line continues today, which is kind of interesting. I think it's the Route 59 for the MBTA. That same route continues, so stretched all the way from 1891 to 2018. So a long, storied and established history of transit, but today, probably more than ever, transit is becoming a really important part of how people get around and the value it brings to making a workplace attractive. So let's bring things up to date. If we look within the Commonwealth here, we have our transit system is all grown up. We have regional transportation agencies across the state. You can see a map there. You can check this out on the MassRidesCommute.com website as well, and you can kind of dig around and click on those different areas and find out more about the transit agency that relates to your area. But as you can see, it really is widespread, and a good proportion of the state is served by transit of one form or another. Interestingly, as we dig into what we mean by transit, it can be all kinds of things. Often buses, probably the first thing that springs to mind. Ferries, obviously, certainly something that we see within Massachusetts. Commuter rail is a big part of how people are getting around, but also underground T trains, those kind of things, and then smaller services, smaller buses, smaller shuttle type services. These all make up the mix of transit that's provided within the state, and all things that obviously your employees may have access to and may be able to make use of. So why do we take transit? Why are we encouraging people to take transit? We often, there's a perception of transit being crowded, difficult, and inconvenient. This is a picture from Japan. I don't think anyone's reached this stage yet here in North America. But often it doesn't have a great reputation. Why are we encouraging people to use this? So I want to look at it from two angles. The first is from the employee angle. So why is it useful for our employees to think about taking transit? What benefits does it offer them? Well, first and foremost, it can certainly save time. So particularly in areas that are more congested, where reaching an area by driving means being stuck in traffic, transit can really save time. So whether that's commuter rail, whether that's a bus service, riding in HOV lanes, whether it's transit that's riding in dedicated lanes, it can save time for employees, which is obviously a huge benefit for people. It can save money as well. The cost of a transit fare generally much less than the cost for gas and the maintenance of a vehicle and parking and all those kind of things. So that's a big benefit too. Reducing stress. We don't always think of that. If you think of the picture of people cramming onto a train in Japan, maybe that doesn't seem like you're reducing stress. But for the most part, the idea of riding on transit is much more relaxing. You're being driven to work. You have the opportunity to do what you want. You're not stuck in traffic. You're not really struggling with that kind of congestion. So it can be a big stress reducer, particularly at this time of year. We think about winter driving, that kind of thing. A lot of people don't want to do that. That's very stressful for people. So if we can reduce that by encouraging them to take transit, that's a big element. Improving the work-life balance. This is something a lot of people are talking about. It's very important to employees. How do we balance that? The work and life outside of work. Transit offers a great solution in that often there are regular schedules that people need to stick to. We generally find people who take transit have a more structured work day. They're more committed to leaving at a particular time. It doesn't mean that they're less busy or they're working less hard. It means they know they have to leave at 5 o'clock to catch that train, and that really helps them balance that work and life. It also increases personal time or potentially work time, however you choose to do it. Not just because maybe you get home quicker, but maybe you have time when you're on that transit trip to do something that you want to do. Some people use that time for work. We certainly have Wi-Fi on some of the services within the state, on the commuter rail, for example, where you can sit and you can check your emails before or after work, do a little bit of work, or you can use it for personal time. You can use it for reading. I actually ride my bike to work now, but when I used to take transit, I read a lot, and one of the things I miss about taking transit is not being as up to date on my reading, whether that's news or fiction, all those kind of things. So it's certainly an option that offers. And then finally, one of the interesting benefits for people who ride transit are the physical health benefits. Again, something you might not think of, but for the most part, the majority of people who take transit are being active either at the start or the end of their journey. So they're walking to a bus stop, they're walking to a station, and when they get to their destination, they're walking or maybe cycling from that destination. So for a lot of people, it adds a little bit of activity in their day that maybe they're not even thinking of. It might only be 10 or 15 minutes, but it all certainly contributes. So if we know that it's good for employees, Why is it good for an employer? Well, if we consider that all these elements are giving you healthier, happier employees, that can only be a good thing. Certainly adds to improved productivity. If your employees are getting to work, they're less stressed, they're less frustrated, they're more able to kind of think about work and focus on that. It can improve punctuality. It can, for the most part, transit services run on a pretty tight schedule. Generally, people arrive at the same time. They build their schedules around that, so they have a lot more certainty with that scheduling and can really improve that punctuality. Probably very importantly, of these last 2 points, the idea that transit can help with employee recruitment and retention. So having access to transit means making your workplace more accessible. So when we think about hiring new employees, particularly from millennial generation who we know are giving up their vehicles in larger numbers, not driving, not having that access to a private car, they need those options to find and access your workplace. And having transit access and supporting transit can certainly help that. Being able to say, we're located on a bus line, we can give you access to bus passes, that kind of thing is very important. And the same on retention. Again, as that workforce turns over, you might be looking for benefits that you can offer to your employees to make the workplace more attractive, become an employer of choice, and having access to transit in one form or another can certainly help with that. Obviously, the other large benefit is the wider benefit to the environment and to our communities. So transit, as we know, is a much more efficient use of the space and the transportation infrastructure that we have. This is a classic picture. I show it all the time, but I think it really illustrates why transit can have the impact that it does. On the left, you'll see all the people needed, and all the cars needed to transport that group of people around their city. On the right there, what you'll see is the number of buses needed to transport that number of people. Clearly, it's a lot smaller. That keeps our streets less congested. It opens up the streets to allow us to do better things with it, make them more pedestrian friendly, make them more economically viable, all those kind of things. On the environmental side, removing those vehicles from the road has significant benefits. So, just to look at, within the Massachusetts context, last year, MassRIDES transit riders, so these are folks who are part of the MassRIDES program, commute with, use our programs as part of their commute plans. They log their trip on the Bay State Commute, formerly New Ride program. They avoided over 15 million miles traveled and saved around 7,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. That is nothing to be sniffed at. That's a significant amount and really shows kind of the impact of transit. Being able to say that as a workplace, this is something that you're contributing to, I think is really valuable. Okay, so I've made the case for you here that it's a good thing to get people riding transit. It's important that people do it. So how do you as a workplace, how do workplaces think about making their workplace transit friendly? This is a subway car that had been turned into an office. I don't think it's actually active anymore. But there are things you can do at your workplace to make it more appealing, make it easier for people to ride transit. So one of the big things we can do is help lower transit costs. Transit costs aren't always the biggest barrier, but they are a barrier to people. And if we can lower that barrier to entry, it might encourage an employee to try transit, to think about this is an option for me. This is something I want to think about. I'm going to give it a go. That also can allow for convenience, and cost saving for employees. The ability not just to get lower cost transit, but maybe access that transit pass within the workplace, to purchase it within the workplace. That's something that can be valuable for them. It also gives you guys a marketable, I want to call it a perk for the recruitment purposes. So to be able to say, if you come and work here, we're going to give you a discount on your transit pass. This is something that's going to make it even more attractive to come and work here. And from the workplace's point of view, from the organizational point of view, it really shows a tangible corporate commitment. So what it's saying is we are committed to, whether it's for environmental reasons or for supporting our employees' welfare, we want people riding transit, and we are making that commitment to it. And look, we're going to put our money where our mouth is and offer a discount. So just to talk a little bit about that, there are multiple different ways of saving employees money on transit. Probably the most significant one are the corporate transit pass programs. The MBTA has this. The other RTAs have similar programs that basically allow a bulk purchase of programs, allowing a workplace to buy passes, either at a discount or just at bulk, and then pass those passes on to their workplace, either at a discount if they choose to subsidize that, or even just to sell them on to make it more convenient. So you know what, you can pick up your transit pass right here in the office. That can be a real help for people. There are also the tax savings that are available for employees. With transit passes, so employees can pay for transit passes with their pre-tax dollars. That's something that is certainly something that can be a big benefit. You know, significant saving every year can be made by employees who are doing that. It's not an overly complicated program, but something that we certainly won't dive into in any detail here, but something that your MassRIDES outreach coordinators can certainly help you with and point you in the right direction to in terms of how that can work. These benefits can be managed in-house, or they can be managed through third parties, such as WageWorks and Edenred. You know, folks who do your other benefits program can make the commute program, the transit pass benefits part of that. So certainly get in touch with MassRIDES to get some more information on that as relates to where you folks are. Another big barrier for employees is information. So a lot of people say, you know what, I would take the bus, but I don't know where it goes. I don't know how to catch it. I don't think there's a bus that serves my neighborhood. They might look out of their office window and say, there's a bus goes by here every day. I have no idea where that goes. So providing information for people can also lower that barrier to say, actually, the bus that stops outside the office, that takes you right to your neighborhood, or it takes you to this commuter rail station that you can connect with, for example. So giving that information to employees can be really helpful. Different ways of doing that in different forms. So transit information in new hire packages is certainly really helpful. So, you know, putting, whether it's a timetable, whether it's a bit more of specific information that says, you know, these are the 2 bus routes that serve our location, this is how far we are from the commuter rail station, whatever it might be, putting that information up front for people who are starting their position with you can certainly be helpful to get them kind of started on the right foot. Putting that information on an intranet site, somewhere wherever people are accessing information online with you folks. So it could be an intranet site, it could be through weekly emails, whatever that is, but putting that information so someone can access it and say, oh, okay, now I know how I need to get here on transit. It could be transit information boards in common spaces. So if your workforce isn't particularly computer bound, if there's the opportunity to put notices up, you know, in a lunchroom that say, you know, here are the bus timetables, here's the transit schedules. These are things that you can use to educate people about transit that's available to them. You could also think about directional signage. So within your workplace, you know, are you close to a transit stop? Would it be helpful to put some signage near your front door that said, you know, if you walk 2 minutes this way, there's a bus stop that will take you to this particular neighborhood or this part of town. So think about those different ways that information can really help move people through. Another big barrier can be the access to transit stops and stations. So this is not necessarily the idea that, you know, well, I don't have any transit that serves my workplace at all. That's certainly a sort of a bigger discussion. But often we find we have workplaces that are close to transit stops and stations, but the accessibility isn't always as good as it can be. This is a picture from Maryland, and this is America's sorriest bus stop. There's a website that kind of does a track of this every year and marks it. And what it shows is, you know, actually, what's the access like from a bus stop or a train station to your location? You need to think about being specific. So what's the distance that we're asking people to walk or maybe to cycle? Is that accessible? You know, is that a particular challenge? But also, how can that access be improved, and what can a workplace do to improve that? So it's not necessarily about moving a transit stop, but it might be, you know, how do we improve some of the access around that? And think about your own work site. So, you know, is pedestrian access across your parking lot sufficient? Is there good lighting? So in the winter months, if someone's walking across there to catch a bus, you know, is that appealing to them? Do they feel safe? Is the snow cleared so that people can easily access and walk between a transit stop and the workplace? So all of these things are things that a workplace can consider when they're thinking about, you know, how do I ensure that people are comfortable taking transit to this workplace? And then if you're moving, and we certainly see plenty of offices moving location, you know, they're growing, they need bigger space. Think about transit access. So, you know, where are you moving to Is there decent transit access around there? Is that by locating near transit, does that make your workplace more attractive and more accessible to people? So think about those options as you consider relocating workspace. The other challenge, kind of building on that, is this first last mile piece. So often it's not just the accessibility in terms of, is there a sidewalk, but actually maybe it's just too far to walk or maybe to cycle for that last piece of the journey. So maybe you have a great transit station close by, but you really just can't access it. That gap is too far. This is a Boston example of where transit stop is really not in the best location for people wanting to move around and access a workplace. So how do we think about that? What are some of the things we can do to fill that gap? The short part of the journey that can really be the most difficult, whether that's distance or whether it's because it's the environment in between is more challenging. So some things we can think about. On the smaller side of things, this idea of multimodal transportation. So the majority of buses now operating have the ability to put a bike on the front. You see the bike a bike rack there on the front of the PVTA bus. This allows someone to ride a bike to a bus stop, put the bike on the front, get off at their destination, and then extend their trip because now they can ride their bike. So maybe actually they can take a transit route that stops a 10-minute ride from their workplace because now they have access to their bike and they can make that trip. Something else we can do is provide people with more detailed walking instructions, to say, it is actually only a 10-minute walk and this is the safest way to do it. Small things that we can do to bridge that gap for people. What are the potential? What's the potential also to work with the city, with your town, to improve that pedestrian realm between transit stations and your workplace? So again, these might be small improvements. They might be things around lighting. They might be things around snow clearance, sidewalk maintenance, that makes it a little bit more convenient to access a workplace from a station. Something else is carpooling from and to transit hubs. So in particular for longer distance commuter rail, for example. Can we encourage people to carpool to that transit hub so that's a connection for them? Or on the other end, can they find a carpool with a colleague who might be driving past that transit hub who could pick them up on the way through? So lots of different ways of trying to bridge that gap. And again, something that your outreach coordinators can certainly help you with MassRIDES. On a larger scale, we do see some workplaces putting shuttles in. So the idea that the gap that we need to bridge between a workplace and a transit station is larger than it can really be done by walking or cycling. But maybe a private shuttle that's provided either by an employer or a property manager, that can be something that bridges that gap. Normally, these things are shorter distance. They serve the morning and evening commute. Some might do a lunchtime run, particularly if the transit hub is near maybe a retail area, something like that. Something that is generally offered at little or no cost to the employee. It's a benefit to them. But obviously, it does require more employer investment of one kind or another. So it does require a little bit more work, a few more resources to make that work. But again, filling that gap is certainly an important way of making your workplace more transit friendly. So understanding employee needs is also helpful. So as we talk about, we want to get more people riding transit, we're persuading them with all these different incentives and supports. Understanding the kind of support and the kind of transit access that employees need can be really helpful. Do you have a particular workforce that is all coming from an area that is well served by transit and would benefit from information about a particular transit area? Or do we know that one of the big barriers is the need for some kind of shuttle between a station and a workplace? So understanding that is really important. And a commuter survey is a great way of doing that. So again, this is something that MassRIDES outreach coordinators can certainly help with, but a commuter survey that really helps understand those particular transit needs of your employees. What are they looking for that might nudge them and move them towards taking transit? Is it information? Is it discounts? Is it, as we talked about, access? What's going to persuade them to make that? That data that you gather can also be helpful for transit agencies as they start to plan services. So understanding, where these large movements of people are within their communities and how maybe transit could better serve that by sort of meeting some of those needs. So again, doing that kind of survey, getting a better understanding of how people are moving around can be really helpful, and it's certainly worth looking at as you think about making a workplace transit friendly. Scheduling is another factor. This isn't transit scheduling. This is more about workplace scheduling. So think about your working day, the times of your working day, particularly if a workplace is in an industry with very fixed shift times, very firm sort of start and end times. What adjustments can you make to meet some transit schedules? And these don't necessarily need to be huge changes, but they might be small little things that allow a larger proportion of the population to access a particular transit route. This could mean sort of flexible start and end times for employees, allowing them to leave a little earlier in order to catch a particular transit service, adjusting shift times, even thinking about weekend shift times as well. Often weekend transit service is different to transit service in the week. So how do those shift times maybe align more closely with the transit schedule? And then policy changes too. So things like pre-arrival time. So an interesting example we found with a particular employer where employees were required to come and clock in 5 to 10 minutes before their shift started, and if they didn't do that, they were going to get penalised on their paycheck. The problem with that is that in order to, people are so scared about missing that, they really needed to arrive so early, and those folks using transit needed to arrive essentially like an hour early, because the transit route that would have gotten there just before their start time wasn't getting them there early enough, so they really had to sacrifice. They had to make sure that they were there an hour earlier. What we did was work closely with that workplace, and they were able to make some changes to say, you know what, if you're taking transit, we can adjust that. We can make that policy a little more lenient, so that now you don't have to arrive an hour early because you're taking the bus, and that's obviously not particularly attractive. You can take the bus that you normally would and check in at the time that you need to. So these small changes, these small tweaks can really help make transit more accessible to people. And then think about transit for work trips. Again, this is a super productive a bus trip, and again, we wouldn't necessarily expect that. But think about how people are traveling during the day, whether they're going to site visits, off-site meetings, and how could you facilitate those trips to be done by transit? So, providing tickets, passes at reception, for example, that someone can just grab on the way out. Thinking about that, allowing people to expense those transit trips in the way that they might, for example, claim fuel mileage. Those kind of benefits can help people think that transit might be an option for them during the day. Obviously, that reduces the amount of travel that they need to do using their vehicle at work, which is, in and of itself a good thing. But also, it enables employees to leave their personal vehicles at home. So oftentimes we hear that one of the reasons people drive to work is because they need their car at work. So if we're able to say to even a few people, well, actually, you don't need your car at work now, because you can take, if we're going to let you take the bus to this meeting, we're going to help you do that. Okay, well, maybe now I can leave my car at home and think about taking transit to work. I think so. That's something again to consider. Emergency Ride Home program. Again, this is something that's offered through MassRIDES. Transit riders are eligible. Just worth reminding folks that is the case. It's really our commuter insurance, so allowing up to $100 reimbursement for an emergency trip home up to 4 times a year. So saying it's okay if you take the bus, it's okay if you take the train. If you find you're in a particular emergency, you can take a cab home, and we're going to reimburse you for that. Just as a refresher, what do we mean by an emergency? So an unexpected personal illness or emergency, a family illness or emergency, a carpool leaving to an illness or emergency, or unexpected mandatory overtime. So these are generally the things that make people say, "Oh, I really need my car. I just, what if these things happen? I can't rely on transit to serve me with that." So to say, okay, we've got you covered if this happens, I think is certainly an asset, and certainly something that should be promoted as part of a workplace transit program. And then finally, in terms of making place transit friendly, thinking a little bit about campaigns and challenges. These are a great way of encouraging someone to try something. So transit often can be sort of this scary thing, this sense of, well, I've never done it before, I'm not ready to commit to taking this, suddenly switching out of driving alone to taking transit every day. A challenge and a campaign allows people to try something, minimal risk, but there's some potential for a reward there. So here at MassRIDES, we do things like try it days, where we encourage people to try riding the bus for a day, get some rewards for that, whether that's being entered into a prize draw, whether it's getting coffee when you arrive at work, all these things that say, just give it a go, see if you like it. Also, we have the Massachusetts Clean Commute Challenge, in the fall. Again, an opportunity to try something different, get rewarded for it. And oftentimes we find that people who do try it realize it's not the barrier, it's not the challenge that they thought it was going to be. Um, and actually, they tend to become more long-term transit riders. Okay, so hopefully now I've sort of sold you on the wonders of being a transit-friendly workplace, and how we can make our workplaces as friendly to our employees who take transit as possible. Um, I want to talk a little bit about how we educate our employees about things they can do so that they can have a better trip experience. So when we're talking to our employees, encouraging them to take transit, some of the details we can provide them with to say, you know what, this might help you as you're taking this transit trip. Might not always be a live band playing on your transit trip. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a particularly special day. But there are things we can do to make that trip more enjoyable and more useful for people. So one of the biggest things is planning the trip. So again, we talked earlier about information, information being a barrier for people, the fear that I just don't know where I'm going, I'm not sure how to use it, I don't know when the bus leaves, I don't know where it goes. So planning a trip is really helpful and really important for people. And we are now living in a world where planning that trip is much easier than it has been previously. So now you don't necessarily need 6 different timetables and all these different maps. You can do transit planning through various apps and tools. The one of the sort of the most robust is the Google Transit Trip Planner. Google sort of knows everything, but it does certainly know its way around a transit system and across multiple transit systems. So for those of you who haven't used the transit planner before, very simple in the same way that you might put in your driving directions, your to and from. You put those directions in on Google Maps, and what you can see is rather than clicking on the little icon with a car, you click on the little icon with a train, and that stands for transit, and it maps out your route for you. It does a number of very great things. Obviously, it tells you which route you should take. It tells you how long it's going to take, which is very useful for people. Again, people's perception is that transit takes them longer, but actually, once they map it out, they realize it's much more feasible than they thought. It also shows you the different types. So, okay, you need to change from a bus to a train. You need to walk 10 minutes from here. This is where the station is. And it can also tell you what the cost of that trip is. So really giving you that information to say, okay, I can see now this is the trip that I need to take. And obviously then you can adjust that to the particular needs. The other thing that we have is the transit app. That does a similar thing, but on your phone. One of the nice things about these kind of apps as well is they track things in real time. So once you've planned your trip and you're waiting at the bus stop, you can actually see when that bus is going to arrive, how long it's going to take you, and it adjusts accordingly. So that information is really helpful. So passing that on to employees is certainly important. As part of that planning, one of the things I always encourage people who are new to transit to do is test out their route beforehand. So don't elect to take transit for your first time on the day that you have a really important meeting that you need to be in the office for at 9 o'clock. That might not be the best day. So on a day when you have something that's less pressing, maybe even on a weekend, try out a route, see what works for you. So you take that route, see how long it takes, see how long the walk is from your house to the bus stop. Figuring that out, where you don't have the stress and you have extra time, can certainly be helpful to feel more comfortable with that trip. Something else to think about, again, particularly for those folks who might be taking commuter rail, is think about parking. So, what's the best option for you? There is parking at the commuter rail stations, but there are certainly challenges with availability. That's something to think about. There are costs involved. How do you think you're going to pay? What's the best model for you? So again, checking that out so that you're not sort of approaching that on a Monday morning knowing that you've got to catch a train at 7:15 and you get to the parking lot and it's full because you didn't realize that. So getting people to think about that, do that little bit of planning beforehand certainly makes things a lot more enjoyable. Passing the time, this is probably really obvious to say. I don't think we need to tell people how to spend their time. But again, it's a great way to think of it, to tell people, this is things you can do. There's cool stuff you can do when you're catching that ride in, whether it's reading, listening to podcasts. I mean, the explosion of podcasting in the past 5 years, a lot of that is down to travel and people commuting, people looking for something to do when they're sat on the bus or the train. Some people are using that time to work. As we mentioned earlier, there's Wi-Fi available on commuter rail. So that might be something that people take advantage of, so they can really use their time as they want to. Trip tracking as well is something that we MassRIDES really want people to embrace. So we have our Bay State Commute tool, formerly New Ride, now Bay State Commute. We want people tracking their transit trips. It gives us those great numbers in terms of how much greenhouse gas emissions are being saved, but it also is a huge benefit for employees. They can earn rewards by tracking those transit trips. They can earn discounts and other rewards every month just for tracking those trips. So this is really a reminder to say it's not just for carpools. We know New Ride and Bay State Commute, is used as a carpool ride matching tool, but it is available there to allow people to track their transit trips, including ferries. Very straightforward to do. If you're a regular transit rider, employees can be tracking those trips every day and earning some great rewards. Very straightforward. The employees just need to register, record their trips, and then redeem their rewards. So another kind of add-on for people who are taking transit, another benefit to suggest to them. Okay, so just before we sort of we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about the future of transportation, the future of transit. These are the kind of images we're starting to see more and more of, these slightly futuristic renderings of different types of buses, like a bus, but not quite like a bus. Different things we're seeing. Transit is changing. The advent of autonomous vehicles, of different fuel sources, of different types of technologies are changing what transit is and how people are going to use it. And potentially it exposes transit to a lot more people. So I just want to run through a couple of slides just to kind of give an overview of some of the things we are likely to see and are already seeing within the transit field in terms of looking forward. So one of the big ones is the other transportation network companies. So the Ubers, the Lyfts, there are others. The idea that there are now these technologies that are filling some of the gaps that transit doesn't serve. The ad on the right hand side, there's a billboard from Lyft, a really interesting depiction of what we mean by filling the gaps. Essentially, what their tagline was: 1 gajillion new stops. So if you imagine the blue routes being our transit lines and all the pinks being all the different connections that connect people now to those transit lines. Their argument is that their services are connecting more and more people to transit. And there's something to be said for that. So now there is an option for people who might have felt that a transit stop was too far from their home or their work to make a better connection to a transit line. So the ability to connect wider populations to transit is certainly out there. And as we're seeing with these companies, the offering is expanding to beyond just something that is like a cab to something that is more like a carpool, or even something that is becoming more like a transit service. So more scheduled service, groups of people riding together and making those connections. It certainly offers a lot of flexibility. It offers a lot of more traveler choice. It opens up those options for riders. But as with all of these things, there are concerns around equity of access and the service. So how are people using this? Does everyone have access to this? There is a cost involved. Is there a risk that, with the advent of these companies, do they focus on particular areas where access is more profitable for them? And also these services rely on people having smartphones and credit cards, and for communities or parts of the population that don't have access to that, where does that leave them? So it's certainly something to be considered. Lyft and Uber are out there and actively supporting that transit network that we have. But again, I think there are caveats and things that we need to think about as we kind of involve them in the transit network that we have. The other thing that we're starting to see is something called microtransit, which some folks may be familiar with. And this is really that space between traditional transit and transportation network companies, the Ubers and the Lyfts, for example. So small scale, on-demand transit, running regular-ish kind of routes, having some flexibility at the start and end, collecting groups of people, making perhaps longer distance connections, either to transit stations or actually to an end destination. Often these are private companies. There is a lot of interest in this. You may have seen it recently. Ford Motor Company paid $65 million for Chariot, who are one of these microtransit firms. So there's interest there. There are agencies that really see microtransit being part of the network. They see the potential within this. There is a risk, however, that and a question around, do these agencies compete with transit, or are they complementing it? So are they, again, like the Lyfts and the Ubers, are they expanding the network that we have available, or are they potentially competing with it? The offering being, you can take your local transit route, or you can pay a bit more and get this kind of fancy shuttle bus that's going to take you right to your destination. But that's only going to operate in certain areas where people can afford to use that. So there is a risk, again, of equity and access being impacted by this kind of work. But I think it's worth considering that microtransit is going to be a growing feature of our transit network. And then, of course, autonomous vehicles. This is something that I think that is, the front of everyone's mind when we talk about the future. Futuristic little pods moving around. This has the potential to be a huge, significant paradigm shift for transit, changing how we think about transit, changing the scale of it, changing the flexibility and access that it offers. Looking at smaller vehicles moving around, much greater flexibility, the costs being over time being less. Really, again, it's about expanding the reach of that mass transit that we have. So going beyond, just reaching into core areas, but reaching into communities, reaching into harder to get to areas, serving that first and last mile area, really bridging those gaps for us. Of course, again, there is a risk involved with that, because the challenge is, what if people start to choose this sort of personalized transportation, these autonomous vehicles, for their whole commute? What if they decide, I'm going to get in my little pod, and that's going to take me all the way to work? And in the same way that maybe a transit vehicle would do, I don't have to drive. I can sit there and read my book or check my emails. But now I'm going to do it on my own. I don't have whatever I perceive the challenges of transit to deal with. So there is a risk, again, that this begins to compete with transit and impact the transit services that we have available to us. It's likely that autonomous vehicles are really going to lead the charge with some of within the transit field. Some of these service vehicles are certainly a great place for it to start, and we do start to see it more in certain areas, whether it's in tourist areas, airports, that kind of thing. But again, something that we are going to see more of within the transit world, and that does have the potential to really expand the reach and quality of service for our transit riders. So just as we round things up here, just to kind of reflect a little bit on how MassRIDES can support you as you're thinking about transit programs and improving transit access to your workplace. We talked about a lot of these already. So MassRIDES can help with commuter surveys to really understand your workplace and the potential for transit ridership. So you might not really have a good idea of how many people could take a particular transit route. So a commuter survey can really dig into that. And again, it's certainly something that the MassRIDES team can help you with to plan and implement and analyze as well. We can promote transit programs as part of outreach activities. So when we come on site and talk to people about their different commute modes, we want to talk to them about the transit programs that are available to them and make those available, talk to people about the advantages of them, talk to them about the value and some of the things that their particular workplace has that they can access. We have try it days. Again, you'll be seeing lots of those in the coming year, so we can come on site and talk to people about trying transit as something that they want to do. And then again, customized travel plans. We talked about this right at the very start. So we're talking about, how do we give people the right information that they need, and
going on and on and on. Nothing interesting.
information that is tailored to their particular trip and their workplace. So what have we learned, hopefully, that we can take away? So we know that transit is a valuable option for many employees across the state. Not everyone, for a lot of people, a lot of communities can access that. We have technology that's making transit easier to use, easier to navigate our way around different systems, multiple systems. Employers can certainly implement programs of different sizes, large programs, small programs, infrastructure, small scale things to make themselves transit friendly. You can, as an employer, you can really become a beacon of to say, we support transit, we want our employees to use this kind of program. The future of transit is flexibility, extending the range, extending the options for people. There is a lot of potential. If we take the positive view, the world of transit is going to open up as there is more flexibility, particularly in those first and last mile connections, in opening up mass transit to more people. And then finally, MassRIDES is here to help. So MassRIDES has got a lot of experience in this. We've got lots of connections. We're all transit nerds. We can certainly help you with a lot of these particular challenges. So, with that said, I will take a breath and open the floor if anyone has any questions. For those of you who don't have questions, if you could just mute your phones, that would be great. If you don't want to talk out loud, you can send a little message in the chat box, and I'll answer what I can.
We cut yeah. Okay. As long as you're
Okay, I'm hearing a few background conversations.
That's great. Yeah. This is fun. Okay.
Everyone knows each other.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
I overheard you mention Santarpios recently. Are you a big fan, or do you like going there? Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions. I'm trying to see if I can mute other people's lines. I'm not
Do they have
sure
another
I
one?
can do that.
Oh, okay. I think I did see that.
Okay.
Yeah, we went once, and because it was on Phantom Gourmet, and I had never, growing up in the suburbs.
Okay,
where
so
I grew up, I had not heard of it.
I'm trying to mute all lines, but I can't seem to be able to do that from this system. But any other questions that anyone has? We're having
He's a character, isn't he?
So will there be printouts? So we can make this presentation available to people, so we can certainly provide that to staff. So one question here.
That's a father. He's got a big head of grey hair and silver hair.
We have someone who's looking to make a connection. Someone's moving from the suburbs to Cambridge. I'm just waiting for this question to come through.
Runs the Empire now. Out loud.
Okay. So we can certainly, Nancy, there's a question from you about making a connection. We can certainly connect you to the right person at MassRIDES here. We've got your email here, so we will email that to you. The presentation will be available. We're also recording it, so we'll be able to circulate that too. So you'll be able to see the slide deck and
it's right underneath the
and also listen to
the tunnel. You come out from the tunnel, and it's right there on the right.
Okay.